Welcome to Malcolm and We and Malcolm. No, Malcolm, we, heard exclusively on malcolmpresents.com, a streaming platform heard around the world and even in Brooklyn.
Good.
Anyway, welcome. Uh, I'm Malcolm Berman, your host, and my co-host is Yana Larson. And Yana Larson, as always, will introduce our guests.
And I will begin.
Begin.
Today, we have some recent guests back to continue a very fascinating conversation. That was part one with Liz Gould and Paul Fitzgerald on February 28th. You can see that episode on our show called Malcolm and We on Malcolm Berman's website, malcolmpresents.com, and on YouTube. And you can listen to it on our podcast site on Buzzsprout. In that episode, we just started to get into the big story. And we talked about their experiences as journalists back in the time of Afghanistan and the Carter administration. We all agreed that it was too much information for one 30-minute conversation and invited them back for part two. I'm pretty sure we are going to want to invite them again for part three because their story is just that amazing and intriguing. But to introduce part two, let's begin here. Afghanistan was an American crusade to win the war against evil empire and remake the world in its own image. This goes right to the heart of understanding the destiny of the Western dream. Instead of a dream, the US was caught in a nightmare of complicated political processes and confusion. What Liz Gold and Paul Fitzgerald witnessed was far different from the narratives that were perpetrated. An example, perhaps, of even though you are seeing this, don't believe it. The story of media manipulated interpretation is mind boggling. However, I digress. Their newest book, The Valediction, combines the esoteric qualities of the Ninth Gate and Field of Dreams as Paul Fitzgerald's mind is open to the unexplored role that the mysticism of Afghanistan played in drawing him into its vortex. That investigation began with his search into his Fitzgerald family's participation in the 12th century Norman invasion of Ireland. The story comes full circle when Paul fulfills his deepest purpose by connecting the land of his ancestors to the ground of Afghanistan in a very personal and mystical way. It reads like a novel, but it all really happened. As Liz and Paul dug into the Fitzgerald family history, they discovered the bitter struggle for power within the Anglo Norman deep state that has raged beneath the surface down through the centuries. On November 22nd, 1963, Americans were shocked by the public execution of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. In the years since, every manner of conspiracy theory has been advanced to explain what happened, but killing the only Roman Catholic president of the United States on the site of the first Masonic temple in Dallas on the Masonic Day of Revenge for the destruction of the Knights Templar suggests a ritual. If the assassination could have been an act of retribution for an 800-year-old vendetta, then we all must begin to view history from a more complex perspective. In order to understand a deep state, it is important to begin to ask deep questions and be willing to accept deep answers, no matter where they lead. Here to talk about this are Liz and Paul. Thanks for coming back. And I hope that I have given a good catch up to where we were and where we are going today.
Excellent.
That was great.
That was. Pick up. I
Yeah.
thought, okay.
Actually, it's apropos now with President Trump wanting them to release all the information about the assassination of John
Mhm.
Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Yes.
And what I was interested in basically is to pick up again, how are you related in a way to JFK? And what did the Fitzgerald legacy have to do with it?
JFK and JFK's grandfather and my grandfather were related. My grandfather uh, was in possession of a 500-acre farm and decided that he wanted to leave it in the hands of his brother and come here in 1900. And so, pretty late for Irish immigrants to the United States, but he heard that there was someone in North Andover, Massachusetts, who was looking for a husband. So he figured that was probably a good place to start. So he took the train up to Boston, and he was not, as we say, my personal branch of the family, leads from him, and his grandfather was from the same area of Ireland, and it turned out there was a really deep involved history with that particular branch of the Fitzgerald family. There were two main branches of the Fitzgerald family, the Kildare and the Desmond branch. The Kildare branch were around Leinster and Dublin, and the Desmond branch were around the southwestern part of Ireland, and they were the single largest landowners in Ireland for 400 years, literally, until the Elizabethan era. The matriarch of the family was this woman named Nesta. Nesta was a Welsh princess, and in 1169, the Fitzgerald family and a lord that they were associated with, nicknamed Strongbow, came to Ireland and invaded, and pretty much found that they were pretty much welcomed and accepted after a number of huge battles, and settled in Ireland and became what was called more Irish than the Irish. They liked Irish culture. They liked Irish women particularly, and settled there, and that became actually Fitzgerald is an Anglo-Norman name. It's a Norman name. Fitz being son of Gerald, and so the marriage between Gerald of Windsor Castle. It was a family of Castellans who had the idea is not exactly sure whether they were there with the Norman invasion in 1066 or they were there beforehand as Normans. They were still Normans. It was a Norman family, but Fitz is Norman French for son of. So at any rate, that's where the name came from. And I discovered that they weren't very Irish at all. They've only been on Ireland for about 1,000 years, 800 years, but when I first became aware of it. So at any rate, so that was the beginning of a deep search. And when we went to Oliver Stone to give him, after he had done JFK the movie, to give him the ancestry, the background that we had at that particular time, which was over 30 years ago at this point. He said, I've already done the story on JFK. I'd like to do a story about Afghanistan. So, what have you got? So we had a very unusual story to tell about that. And it was kind of interlinked with the whole Fitzgerald history anyway. So that's what we began a quest of back in 1992, 1993.
Well, in terms of the question you asked about the relationship between JFK, though, is actually very specific. And it was in the early 20th century when JFK met with Honey Fitz, who was JFK's grandfather, and he was the mayor of Boston. And Paul's grandfather was the head of the Carmen's Union, and had to have dealings with the mayor because of a potential strike. And in their conversation, they came to accept the fact that they were related, that there were Fitzgeralds in the Southwest that were close enough together. And then in the future, after doing research, a number of family members were doing research into the history. Documents were actually found that actually proved more specifically that they were definitely what I guess one could say cousins, okay? Some level of cousin. It's not that it isn't more clear than that. It is a level of cousin. But what was interesting was when we were in Abbeyfale, which was the Irish town that Paul's grandfather left the acreage and did not return to farm again. That was actually the location where we were in 1997, and when we went to a big celebration, and there was a whole bunch of family Fitzgeralds in this bar, And one of Paul's, I think it was your uncle's
No,
son.
it was a cousin. He would have been one of my father's
Well, yeah,
cousins.
but
Yeah.
but the idea here was after he asked Paul, how are we related? And he said, well, my
Grandfather
grandfather and
and
your
your
grandfather
grandfather.
were brothers. And he looked at Paul and he said, everyone in here is a Fitzgerald, and you're closer to me than everyone. But you see, so in the sense of relationship, so that's why you reach a certain
And
point.
what was interesting about it too is that we stayed with a woman on the street at a B&B who ran a B&B. And as we were leaving, she said, you could have been born in this town. She said,
As you are right now.
as you are right now. She said, you are so much like them. It's not funny. So it was interesting to see, and because I felt that way my whole life, even as a kid, I had a night outfit, and I was doing the whole sword thing, and I've always kind of been, and people would meet me along the way, and they'd say, you're a soldier, aren't you? Or you're a spy, and I got that a lot.
Mostly spy.
Mostly spy. Liz and I
Well,
would.
did you ever connect to the Kennedy family?
We did connect. We've run into them on a number of
Yeah, we met
occasions.
them at functions
Oh
and
yeah,
things like
we
that.
have on a number of occasions, but the Kennedy family is one thing. The Fitzgerald family is something else.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make because there are a lot of people today when they hear Kennedy and Fitzgerald, they don't even realize that Fitzgerald is what JFK's middle name is about. That's for many people doesn't
As I say,
register.
there are two branches of the Fitzgerald family. The Kildare branch of the Fitzgerald family now goes by the Duke of Leinster. He's a titled lord in the British Empire, and I believe he has a seat in Parliament, and that is the Desmond Fitzgeralds, of which I am a part, were basically run out of the empire in 1583, and the last Earl of Desmond he was beheaded in 1583, and you could look back. They were enormous landowners.
Important point though, the last letter he wrote before he was executed was to Queen Elizabeth, and it was from Abbeyfale, the very place that Paul's grandfather left. So that shows you how directly Paul's family was connected to
Right.
the actual family that fought the Elizabethans. So
I'm wondering if you could claim any of the land there now as one
ah,
of the long lost relatives.
We did. We received a letter a number of years ago, a couple of decades ago, actually, about a legal effort to try to reclaim the land that was
yeah.
seized. And I've done the DNA tests and whatnot, and there's no question that I am directly connected to the ones that were there in the 12th century. So it's kind of it's a strange experience, to be able
To know.
to know specifically because of the DNA business that you're related to somebody who was intimately connected with the creation of the British Empire.
Huh?
And
So can you claim any titles? Could you become a lord or a baron or
I don't know if I'd want one. Of course,
Yeah.
there's a lot of obligations that go with being an earl, I think. As they have tried to resurrect the earldom on a couple of occasions. There was a what was called a hereditary knighthood that was passed down from generation to generation, and it turned out that there were three knighthoods in the Fitzgerald family, and the White Knight, the Black Knight, and the Green Knight. And this particular one was the Black Knight, the Knight of Glyn. And so when we were there in 1997, my father's cousin, she said, you can't really write a story about the Fitzgerald family without talking to the knight. And so anyway, so she said, I called him. So the phone rang about 3 minutes later, and it was the knight. And he said, come by the castle. I'll be back in about a half an hour, and we can talk about what you've uncovered. So the knight was a very nice guy, Desmond Fitzgerald, and he'd been to Harvard University, and he had a degree in architecture, and Georgian. That was his specialty was Georgian architecture.
Which was his castle.
which was his castle. His great grandfather, I guess, had taken what was essentially a manor house, and he'd put turrets on it and made it look like a castle. The real
And he rented out the space.
yeah, very expensive, $5,000 a night for a room.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
A night with a K.
a Knight, a Knigget, as they
Yeah.
used to say. So anyway, so it turned out it wasn't really a castle. The castle had been blown to pieces back in the 16th century by when the Fitzgeralds went to war with the Elizabethans, but you could still visit that. And it was it was a fascinating, and it's the first thing he said to Liz was, "So, what got into your mind joining this crazy family?" Responded appropriately by saying,
No, my family.
Have you ever traced your lineage from your mother's side, or not the Fitzgerald side?
My mother's side are Markeys. They're from the north of Dublin, from County Meath, and they've got their own story to tell. It's a very different.
Well,
the northern
Old Irish.
Yeah, the Old Irish.
Old,
Markey is a much more Old Irish name than Fitzgerald.
And it's also French, isn't it?
Well, that's what she was told.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were told. No, I haven't delved into it. We met some of the Markeys in Northern Ireland, actually, and the northern people are very different from the Southern Irish. My mother used to say, "Oh, they're only just farmers down there in the South. They're only educated intellectuals in the North." But she was the driving. I'm my mother's son, actually. I mean, it's really she was the driving force in my cultural worldview.
So is March 17th or March a national holiday in your house? St. Patrick's Day?
But you can see we're in a green room here. We celebrated. That's my grandfather's desk behind us.
Yeah.
It's got the pictures. It's got the pictures of the.
Wait, let me move this.
It's got all the pictures of the patriarchs sitting
Ah.
in the kitchen of my grandfather's house up in.
Well, I think we're related spiritually because I was bar mitzvahed on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh,
There you go. That's all it takes.
And I wore a green bow tie and a green cummerbund.
Well, there really is an attraction between Irish men and Jewish women. This is I've come from a Jewish family. Paul's cousin Ed Markey married a Jewish woman, and we have other Irish.
We have a very good friend whose name is Dunphy, Dunfey, and they own some hotels in the area. They used to own the Parker House, Omni Hotels, and we went to he lives in Switzerland now with his Jewish wife. We went to see him before he moved off to Switzerland a few years ago, and he said, "Boy," he said, "you and your cousin Ed and me," he said, "we're all related." He said, "We're all, he said, we all married Jewish women." And I said, "Yeah, but I was the first."
And so your cousin is Ed Markey.
Right, Senator Ed Markey.
Right.
Yeah.
First cousin. My mother and his father were brother and sister.
But before I forget, we're doing the show tonight is Purim, the Jewish holiday.
I don't know what that is. What do you do at Purim?
You celebrate. You eat and drink. That's all Jewish holidays. You eat and drink.
That's where your Irishness comes in.
Right.
This is when maybe we'll do a show one time with Esther and saving the Jewish people from annihilation.
Uh-huh.
Sounds fascinating.
But anyway, I wanted to find out also, you said something about the assassination from JFK had something to do with his Fitzgerald background.
Well, there was a ritual nature to it, which Liz will explain.
Right. Well, what we did is we dug into the Fitzgerald history, going back to the origin of the family, which takes you back to the 11th century, when the first Fitzgerald, Gerald of Windsor, was married to Princess Nest, and that really was the creation of the family.
In 92, I think.
Something like that.
Between 1092 and 1092.
I'd love to see your family tree. It probably takes about 10 books.
It's pretty long.
Yeah.
There was a very good history that was written in the Earl of Desmond, the Knight, the Black Knight mentioned it to us when we met him, and it was written by a guy by the name of Richard Burleth, and it's called the Twilight Lords because they came to power in the first 400 years of the millennium, and then wound up for the next 400 years being brutally suppressed by the British Empire. And they really were, Ireland was really, the control of the land that they had was so complete and they merged with the Irish clans, so they had this interwoven network of control over Ireland that was very difficult to break.
Well, it was also a big threat to London, and that's what there was I mean, these warlords who become kings have to watch these warlords who might want to take over what this king controls.
The upstarts.
Exactly.
And
so
the Earls of Desmond never behaved the way London wanted them to. They always acted independently. And the 13th Earl of Desmond, the last Earl was the 14th Earl. The 13th Earl of Desmond made a point of going to Rome. And at the time, because of canon law, you could declare your own sovereignty from an empire, any empire, that you were under the control. You were under the control of the Christian Rome. And that was it. And if you wanted to declare your own independence, you could do that. And he did that.
So can I claim my independence now in the United States?
The edict probably still stands, yeah. But you might have to become a Roman Catholic to do it.
Well, I think, but in terms of the Fitzgerald legacy, connecting it to JFK and the assassination, what we did is we looked at the history of the Fitzgeralds, starting very much with the Norman invasion of Ireland, which was pretty much a Fitzgerald invasion. I mean, if you look at the list of invaders, almost everyone is a name connected to Fitzgerald, Paul's Fitzgerald history. In fact, the line Paul came up with to describe it was, every name on this list was at my father's funeral. Okay, that's close. All the names
are still exactly the same.
Exactly.
And there was a tradition in my father's family where the oldest son was named William.
And
my oldest brother is William. My father was William. His grandfather and great-grandfather were William. And apparently my great-grandfather got very upset with my great-grandmother because she named her oldest son Michael.
So we have all those pictures up there. Those are all the great, great, and great, great grandfathers.
She broke the train. Do you ever go back to a family reunion?
Well, we did go back. The 1997 was really that was about as big as it ever got. And we met all the family, and they were all there in this pub. And that was when my father's cousin said to me, he said, "How exactly are we related?" And I said, "Your grandfather and my grandfather are brothers." And he went, "Uh-oh." My oldest brother actually went there in 2005, 2006, and with his wife, they did a bicycle tour through France.
Wow.
And through France and the whole area in Ireland. And we heard that they were a little nervous about the fact that he showed up because of this right of primogeniture that was very much a part of the Norman rule. The oldest son got everything, and everybody else
did give it up, though.
He did give it up, but they were still concerned. I'm not exactly sure why they were concerned, but the fact is that they might have been concerned that somebody was going to make a claim on the territory. Yeah. And in fact, while we were there, one of the nephews actually said to me, "Why don't you ask my dad to give you an acre? You could buy a house there and come and vacation." I said, "Oh, I'm sure he's more than happy to do that." Right. But at any rate, I know it's like, it's such a beautiful area, the southwest of Ireland. And with Tralee is one of the places, and Cork is down there, the Ring of Kerry. It's just awesome. I mean, it's a wonderful tourist target.
Yeah. But again, in terms of this legacy that we're bringing forward, when you go back to the 400 years between the Norman invasion in 1169 and the last Earl of Desmond's beheading in 1583, you can see an increasing problem that the Fitzgeralds were becoming to London. And when it really escalated with Henry and the whole,
Henry VIII.
Yeah, the eighth, and Henry VIII. And of course, the creation of the Church of England really set up probably the last straw, because the Fitzgeralds were with Rome. And that's where you get that friction between JFK and the Brahmins who took over this country. That's where you're kind of getting that tie-in.
The Earls of Kildare worked out a relationship with the Empire after a number of uprisings, and they finally settled it. But the Earls of Desmond never worked that out. And they always maintained their independence, and they always said, "No, we rule this country, you don't."
Well, to be simplistic, from my understanding of history, Henry VIII became broke away from the church because the Pope didn't let him get a divorce.
Well, that
Well,
we
that's
know
Very
one of
that
the
simplistic.
that's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
I think we think it's more complicated than that.
It's got
Because
more aspects.
Yeah.
Everything is more complicated, but that's a good story.
it's the one that
Yeah.
But it
you
was because being Protestant versus Roman Catholic too,
Well, you
right?
know, actually,
Well, actually, not the Church of England.
the Church of England really, is the Church of Ireland, which is what they created. But the fact is that today, ecclesiastically, that
they're almost
the
identical.
difference between the Episcopal religion, Episcopalian religion, and the Church of Rome is pretty much identical, and they've agreed to that.
Yeah, except for the veneration of Mary. That really is a major difference. But in terms of the actual ceremony of
Yeah.
the practices,
The practice, the actual
the actual
practice. When you go to
yeah.
in fact, we have
And
we've
icons.
known lots of people over the years who've gone over from the Catholic Church to the Episcopalian
Practically no difference at all.
because they still want to have a religion and be religious, but they don't want it to be from Rome. So
And that's called Anglican then, is that
that's
right?
but here
Okay.
it's Episcopalian. That's
Yeah.
what it's referred to as
Yeah.
All
Episcopalian.
right.
So, but in terms of what we're connecting now and what our roundtable next week is going to be about is in the last stage of the Fitzgeralds, basically, the Desmond Wars went on for 30 years with the Elizabethans and reached the point finally where there was just a total genocide against the entire families that control the lands. What they say is close to 1 million acres of land.
Close to 1 million acres of land.
At that
the
point,
best farmland in
right.
Europe.
And-
So
And so what family would that be? Those with the Fitzgerald then that they were against?
Fitzgerald
Okay.
controlled
Yes.
by family and also by associated clans. They
Right.
they completely embraced the Irish way of doing things. Brehon law was their law as opposed to British common law, English common law, and all kinds of aspects to it, which was resented by the Elizabethans. Okay?
More than
So,
resented.
so do they think that any part of that assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy had to do with the old country or getting sort of a
That's what we're
That's
dealing.
what we
That's
what
exactly
we decided that there were a lot of
Part-
things that
Part
really
3.
right. Well, see, what we're connecting is the creation of the British Empire. It has been said is 1583. That's one of the ideas that it became a formal idea. It also happened to be the same year of the beheading of the last Earl of Desmond. And when you're creating an empire, people have to understand that, many people don't connect the whole idea of mysticism, mystical power is inherently the power behind imperialism. If you want to become an empire, in fact, in the 19th century, Cecil Rhodes was referred to as one of the greatest mystical imperialists of the century. Okay, that is the power that makes you imperial. And so
it's referred to as the sacred hierarchy.
Is it also the manifest destiny then that,
well,
kind of?
I think that was the way it was expressed in the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
Yes, it is an imperial view of the world. But
Mhm.
where you're drawing your power from is not from this realm. It's the power of the imaginal realm, the power of dreams, the power
God said that
Yes,
this
the
was
God-
Exactly,
God's
and that's
power
where
is
the
all-
divine right of
Yes,
kings
yes,
comes in.
exactly.
So it was like another computer program that was running very deeply inside the system
So
that they were beholden to, that the higher echelon, the elites were beholden to, but didn't necessarily get the lower, didn't get the peasants involved in the process.
Well, especially in the United States, I think people have been educated into
Right.
thinking this is all nothing stuff. Don't worry about that.
Well, what's happening
We
is
found
that
very different.
that's beginning to change. There is beginning to be an acceptance of it. There's a number of academic papers that have been written. Now, when you watch a movie about the Elizabethans, you see once in a while they talk about John Dee, the magician, and the original 007 who worked for Queen Elizabeth, and Frances Walsingham, who was the head of her Secret Service and her Secretary of State. And the fact is that, these are all people who became directly involved in defeating the Fitzgerald family in Ireland. And when you look back at the history of MI6 as an example, England's Secret Service, in which James Bond is the preeminent figure, you begin to see that they instructed the creation of the CIA. In fact, you had British Secret Service people who came over in the early 1950s, the late 1940s, early 1950s, to look at the way the Pentagon was set up and to look at the way the CIA was set up. And they said, you've duplicated exactly what we did in India.
Yeah, the CIA was originally in this country originally the OSS,
Right,
the
right.
organization during World set up during World War II was there
Right.
Which was
the
an
spy
elite
service.
group,
Well,
which was referred to as oh so social because of the kind of people
well,
that were the high level elites that were involved in it in the United
yeah,
States.
well, the man who actually set up the original OSS, Wild Bill Donovan, referred to his first agents as Knights Templar.
Not then
And
I've
Knights
heard.
Templars are the ones who were cut down by Rome in 1314. The guy, Jacques de Molay,
Was
okay,
burned at
was
the stake.
burned at the stake. He was the last control,
He was the last
the leader
The-
of
leader Knights
the
Templar.
Templars,
Yeah,
and that is a day of infamy for the Knights Templar.
November 22nd,
Right.
it remains that.
Believe
isn't there a movie something with the Knights of the Templar where parts of
Many,
looking
there are
It's
many movies.
The Da Vinci Code is all
Da
about
Vinci Code?
Oh,
the
there's probably
multi
something with the name James Bond too, because James figures very prominently in the
But,
King
but
James.
anyway, guys, do you realize that we have another half hours up and we
Like I
haven't
said, we have to have part
and we
three.
haven't even scratched the surface.
I know.
I didn't get to my juicy last part. Absolutely. You
Yeah,
have to.
save it for the next time.
I
So
will.
we'll leave it for the next chapter and we'll promote it to
Okay.
tell all your friends about it so they'll be listening.
We will
Okay.
do that.
We will.
Anyway, thank you once again.
Thank you. Wonderful
And
seeing you.
and again, in another 2 days, or 3 days will be Valentine's Day, and we can talk about that.
Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh,
And
Malcolm.
anyway, thank you guys, and then thank you, Yana, for another, great show.
Thank
And
you.
you're listening to Malcolm and We, heard exclusively on malcolmpresents.com. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.